G'day everyone, welcome back to Free Kick, the official AFLW fantasy podcast, and you join us here today for one of the most important episodes before the season starts, and that is our review of the pre-season games that happened over the weekend. Now, today I'm joined ably by Jono and Mel. I'm going to ask you first, Mel, does it feel like real football is back, or at least nearly back?
It does. I got to say, the match sim games from the weekend before, where I actually went to like 3 or 4, felt a little bit more like footy was back than just watching the practice games, because unfortunately pretty much none of them were in Victoria. So that was a bit disappointing. Didn't really get that atmosphere. And then I didn't go to the one that Jono went to on his own, so that was on me. But I am excited. I'm so glad that I can spend my weekends watching footy.
And Jono, did it feel like you had, outside of being abandoned, that the footy is at least around the corner at this stage?
It did. It did feel like it was back. It's very funny. I think on behalf of everyone who's not in Victoria right now, the Vic bias coming out of Mel is crazy. But no, I think
real football didn't happen in this state. It's not on yet.
Exactly.
Home.
I love it. But no, it did feel like footy was back, and I love the vibe at the AFLW games. Like in the Bombers game, for example, Paige Scott didn't play, and she was just walking around the crowd chatting to different people. It was honestly exceptional stuff.
And you asked her if she's playing midfield, right?
Yeah, no, naturally, we went in depth into all of her fantasy stuff. She's going to be good this year. Don't worry.
And you've relayed that answer back in advance, so we've all factored into our team analysis.
Oh yeah, of course.
Just telling us now.
Of course. I wasn't sitting by myself in the stands, just sitting there miserable the whole time, going, "Oh, where were the 5 other people that I invited along here?" Don't worry about that.
Well, that's hopefully not a bad omen for the rest of the podcast. 5 people sitting along here, sitting alone by yourself. So what we're going to do today is we are going to do a breakdown of the key fantasy relevant takeaways from each of the 9 games that happened over the weekend. Now, I'd love to say we threw to an absolute firecracker of quality to start, but we actually threw to part UFC match, part football game happening between West Coast and St Kilda. Mel, you were the one in charge of coming up with the fantasy relevant takeaways from this. At the very least, first, how did the game go? What was the situation?
It went about as you would expect. So we had the 17th place with West Coast versus St Kilda, who had a pretty good season in season 8, so 9th. So we kind of expected this to be a bit of a flogging anyway. And it was St Kilda 55 to West Coast 23. This game was on Friday night in WA. The game, though, I mean, it was going to be maybe a bit of a flogging for West Coast, but they also really didn't help themselves here by switching around 2 of their key midfielders. So we had Swanson playing in defence and Robert playing forwards. So, it didn't really look like a great new start for them.
It really surprised me to see those 2 players playing predominantly out of our predicted positions, albeit we knew that Roberts is a very capable forward. And
Absolutely.
Swanson, in the West Coast episode, we talked about her potentially spending more time off of halfback, just with what they're trying to do. The degree to which they did was certainly a concern. Were there any injuries that we needed to be aware of, at least during the game or kind of beforehand, to mix things up at all?
Yeah, so I guess just for the rest of the episode as well, we're doing some major call-outs of who was missing and who was injured in these games, because not so much in this one, but we're seeing who was rested before the game have a really significant impact on how the game went. So we definitely need to be keeping things like that in mind. In terms of St Kilda, we did see a couple of injuries, I think, during the game for Hannah Priest and Georgia Patrikios, who probably later towards the game there, but we'll have to wait for injury reporting to see if they're going to make it into round 1. But in terms of going into this game, it was mostly just the West Coast mix-up.
Yeah, Patrikios in a moon boot did not look very good at the end of the game there, so hopefully nothing to worry about, but concerns for sure.
I love how you've gone, she's in a moon boot. Hopefully nothing to worry about, as though that's something you wear when you have nothing
That's
to worry about.
That's how you ice your foot.
I was certain that Meg McDonald had done her ACL, and apparently it was just cramping. So Who knows what I know? I'm waiting on the doctor's reports for sure.
Yeah, good. I don't know if a career as a sports doctor is necessarily on the go if you think an ACL is a cramp. Mel, you're in charge as well of fantasy takeaway. What's your number one fantasy takeaway from today, or from that game, sorry?
Yeah, so something I really wanted to be able to keep a lookout for in these games was players who looked really fantasy relevant that we haven't discussed before in either the club review or really any other time in the preseason. And one of them that absolutely shone in this game was Serene Watson, who I had not really thought about before, and I'm sure you guys hadn't either. She's a defender priced at $413K, and she was absolutely the Saints' key cog coming out of defence. It really made it look like she was in for a big year, and we thought there could be something interesting going on with St Kilda's backline with Paige Trudgeon coming in. We were hoping that might free up B. Jacobson for some more fantasy relevancy this season. But the addition of Paige Trudgeon actually really more so gave Serene Watson this fantastic role.
She had this beautiful role, as you said, but it was predominantly just like setting up off the back of stoppages and getting the kind of sideways, kind of slightly backwards kicks all the time. I thought she showed some really excellent decision making as well by foot, and there was a couple of she took almost all the kick outs too. Just really showed a quality with ball in hand that I had not appreciated before. She'd come across from Gold Coast 2 seasons ago. Well, the year before last, and she kind of got mentioned as someone who'd been as a midfielder as a junior. But it looks like she's taken that kind of key defensive role with aplomb. My question for you both is, are you concerned that watching that game, she basically had no one to play on? So she got to set up off the back all the time because there's not particularly good forward pressure from West Coast, if I can put it kindly.
Yeah, look, there's definitely some concerns there. I thought Amy Franklin did a pretty good job providing a target. It wasn't the most ideal forward line setup. Who else did they really have up there, West Coast? They were looking at Michaela Weston, took a few good marks in the first half, and Ella Roberts was up there, so it's not no one, but it's certainly not the forward lines they're going to be going up against throughout the season.
I think it was, very much to me, it looked like they had no real forward pressure. They were allowing St Kilda very often to just get hands or cheap kicks out the back, and then St Kilda were going the other way. There was a couple of times I noted watching the game where it was like some really nice change of like Watson to Lambert to Wardlaw to Friend or to someone inside the 50. And I was like, okay, this looks like a pretty solid outfit. Like this is some of the best ball movement I've seen in a while. From St Kilda, sorry. They're not that good.
I was going to say, that's a shining review.
I do think, though, that the second most fantasy relevant point from this game is probably the one that a lot of people came out very obviously with some quotes as being like, oh, that's a bit of a warning.
Yeah, and it was the aforementioned move of Ella Roberts to more of a forward role than we were hoping to see. She did rotate a little bit between the midfield and forward, but being quite firmly plonked in that full forward role for a chunk of the game was quite concerning. Alarmingly, in both a good and a bad alarm, she still took away best on ground for the Eagles despite this. So I'm not really sure if that says more about how great she is or how bad some of the other Eagles players may be.
Really, before it was Vic bias, now it's Freo bias.
Yeah, I mean, they're both coming through. But so it means that it loosens her fantasy relevancy because she is listed as a mid. She's coming in quite expensive, but she's going to be potentially a bit more in that forward role. If anyone was thinking of starting her, this is a big red flag.
It is a red flag that's got a tinge of green.
Morocco?
If only because the West Coast looked easily their best when Ella Roberts either sat at CBAs, so she had a couple in the first half that I saw, but they were very intermittent, or when she clearly either got the go-ahead or my prediction, which she got bored and just rolled all the way up from halfway inside the D50 to try and get a clearance and try and affect something. Almost every time she did that, there would be a West Coast clearance. Now, almost immediately see the issue, which is they don't have many good targets after that point. But I also think that the best quarter of any one player, outside of probably Liv Vesely's second quarter, she looked very, very good coming out the front of stoppage. I think Ella Roberts' fourth was top-notch when she played midfield. Kicked the goal
as you would expect. Yeah.
I was just worried by Daisy Pearce after the game saying she impacts whether she is forward or mid. It's our job to pick the best moments to have her in each area of the game, which suggests this isn't just a practice game thing. This is happening all season.
Well, that is kind of concerning because it doesn't lock her into that midfield role. If it's kind of going with the Zali model where Zali's like, I don't care where I play, I just want to be around the ball wherever that is. If it's forward, I'll go forward. If it's not, I'll go midfield. If that's the role that they're kind of putting Roberts in here, it does mean more ball, like more time around the ball, more opportunity for impact. But I don't, on one side it could, but how often is the ball going to be forward and then do they keep her forward if it is?
Yeah.
Not, if it is not.
I definitely got Kate Hoare type of role vibes. And I think that was another thing that I noted watching West Coast. They were a side last year who were very content to just chip the ball around the back to get out of games under Michael Pryor. So I thought Charlie Thomas looked good, but I didn't see the same kind of game plan. I saw an intent, albeit misguided, because there was a bit of lack of skill at times to try and move the ball faster, to not try and over-accumulate across half-back. And so I'm kind of imprinting, what do I think Melbourne does and what Daisy Pearce has worked with at Melbourne for so long onto this new West Coast team. So I think there's definitely some pros and cons for Ella. She looked amazing as a midfielder. She was their best player when she was there. But I didn't love how much time she spent forward. She went missing in that third quarter for, it felt like 20 minutes, almost the whole thing.
Yeah. When you say that her fourth quarter was the best, I think there's a couple other players we need to talk about that arguably had better quarters. And it was the second quarter of Grace Kelly where she kicked 2 goals. I think she was often that exit kick for Serene Watson out of half back. And on that wing, she was phenomenal. So a defender at 554K. I'm not sure she's going to be able to do this every week, but certainly looked very, very impressive. And the other one is Jessie Wardlaw. I think after quarter time, she just got on top of those West Coast defenders, a lot of whom the key defenders were missing, but 4 goals, sensational. Again, is another player where I think this was just the matchup. I wouldn't necessarily think that she's a starting play, but 2 very impressive games from those 2.
And a quick whip around on Rookie Watch. Was very excited to see Verity Simmons out there, defender priced at $300,000, but also Jamie Harkin, who last I checked isn't even in the game as a player to pick, was absolutely everywhere. Really strong body, not afraid of the contest. I think she got smacked in the face a couple of times and just kept on going. Looked like a great player. Don't know if they'll be playing round 1 necessarily, and unfortunately someone we can't pick right now, but that's a name that I'm watching if she's listed on a team sheet to come out for sure.
Yeah, I think she popped in the first half. It was one of those ones where she was around abouts a fair bit. I also think that the callers were confusing her with Ali Drennan at times.
Oh, really?
But it's certainly someone who's played a bunch of Waffle W. I think she's 27 or 28, so she's a bit older, mature body. 100% a name I'll be watching. The one that really impressed me at times as well, again, probably heard her name more than she actually got fantasy stats, I reckon. But Charlotte Simpson looked good. And when we did the St Kilda episode, that was the rookie from St Kilda that I was most like, if she gets a game, I think she'll be really good. And she had a shot at goal that she probably should have put away, but also had some really good moments in a pretty feisty midfield stoush.
Yeah. No Patrikios. This could be one that we actually see around 1 too.
Yes. Well, that was actually one thing. We saw almost none of Hannah Stewart, and she was a name that people were talking about a lot. But we did see a bunch of CBAs for Charlotte Simpson, so a big watch on that one. Well, unless you guys have anything particularly pressing and urgent, speak now or forever hold your peace. We're going to move across to the second game of Friday night, and John, I'm going to get you to give me the rundown on Brisbane and Richmond.
Yeah, so this was actually a cracking game of footy for Friday night. Basically, the Brisbane Lions got over Richmond in a comeback victory, 2-point margin up at Brighton Homeroom's Arena. Look, it's a game where Richmond, I think, traditionally seemed to do pretty well against the Lions, but they had the complete run of play for the first half, maybe halfway into the third quarter, and the Lions had to do a lot of work to turn it around. The Lions were missing Ali Anderson and Shannon Campbell, who were a big part of that premiership team. The Tigers, on the other hand, were missing Sarah Hosking, so there's a couple missing from the midfield mix. But yeah, I thought it was a very good game, and it was very interesting to see how they approached it each. So I don't think there were any major injuries from a fantasy perspective. Sinead Davidson might have concussion, but 2 weeks before the next game, I don't think it'll mean she misses round one.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to say that there was nothing major to come out of injuries or anything missing structurally, surely then the fantasy takeaways are going to be as prescient and as sharp as we can possibly have in these preseason games. What's your first one?
First one is Kate Lutkins, who defender priced at $369K. She's missed a season or so with injuries, with pregnancy, but she looked absolutely back to her best form. I think it was only a few seasons ago she was averaging 74 or something like that. And this game, the ball did spend a lot of time back there, but she was intercepting plenty. She was their best transition out of defense. We know the Lions like to switch it a lot to kind of get around these walls created in front of them. So I really liked it. She is 36, which, always a red flag on being 36.
And that 74-point season was in season 2, so 2018.
Wow.
It's a long time ago. Yeah. But look, she's priced so low. Even if she went half of that, she would be value. So I think we're in for a good season. The second fantasy thing that I want to talk about was a little different, and that was the Brisbane Lion CBA mix, because no Anderson, I was really curious what they were going to do, and they were in the first half clearly testing some things out. So Ellie Hampson ran through the middle quite a bit, which we'd predicted, but Jade Ellinger and Poppy Bolts, which traditionally outside defenders, were running through these CBAs quite a lot. They were getting outdone, though, by the Richmond midfield, and in the second half, Courtney Hodder was swung into the middle and honestly completely transformed that midfield. She won the very first clearance in the third quarter. She had a massive quarter. She would have had, 6 or 7 tackles and a whole bunch of disposals. I think when we were saying that she could move into the midfield mix, I think she has done everything she possibly could to put her best foot forward there.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. My issue from a fantasy perspective is, that's you're paying for $700K for a forward that what do you reckon? Maybe 3 or 4 touches in the first half at that.
It was grim. She had a goal, but that could have been her only touch. Honestly, it was very quiet. So, yeah. The thing is, once she's in the midfield, she scores so well. In a half a game, I think she would have put up what everyone else put up in a full game. So it's a challenge. I also, as much as I think they were being beaten, I think Jade Ellinger actually had a really good game. So I don't think they're going to give up on these sort of players.
Yeah, I wonder how much that role, because we do really like Courtney Hodder when she is in the midfield getting the tackles, as we said, but I wonder how much that role is going to stay when Ali Anderson comes back, and if these kind of big outs are potentially inflating fantasy scores. Now, I still like Hodder. She's still in my side. And this is almost confirmation because we know she likes to tackle and we saw a lot of it. But, yeah.
She gets thrown in tougher matchups because I think her pressure is so elite that she causes problems for other teams. And they do open up with a relatively tough run to start the year. I don't know how much they're going to get pushed by Collingwood, but Brisbane starting out with North, at the very least, I'd expect Hodder to see some time in there again. That was their grand final matchup from last year. Maybe not against Melbourne. Maybe Melbourne can look better than they did in their preseason game. But I think the fact that they're going against traditionally tougher matchups, you might see a bit more Hodder midfield. It's actually in those quieter games where they don't need her to do as much, where she might score those 30s and 40s. Well, I wanted to say one thing. It needs to just be a sentence. Eilish Sheeran is a midfielder. She looked amazing. Lock her in, Eddie.
Love to see it.
Well, another couple of players I wanted to mention. It seems like, I reckon, Jono, this player has copped more mentions for someone who has never entered our sides than anyone else in the competition, and that's Katie Brennan. She cops up every year. Even before we did a podcast, we were talking about her. She looked really, really good. and has a great run of matchups to start the year. She's a top 5 averaging forward from last year. Mel, did you have her 3 in your rankings?
Yeah, she was pretty high, and she's been in my team up until Courtney Hodder took her spot. She's great. You were quite cold on her previously. Was it what was it in the game that changed or kind of warmed your opinion?
Mainly the crap state of the rest of the forwards.
Yep, that checks out.
No, I liked what I saw from her. I reckon the 3 goals might not be sustainable, but it was a relatively high mark performance. I don't think that was the best Brisbane side, but I do think that if she can perform as well against worse teams, there are worse picks you can make. I like how it suits the structure of, if I want to limit trades in the forward line, I probably don't need to go KB. She doesn't need to leave my side for a month, 6 weeks.
Yeah. I also really liked the disposal that was coming to her. I think the midfield, when they were clear, they were kicking really well to her. And if they're doing that against some of the weaker teams in the league, that's really promising.
Yeah, I think KB was highly score affected, and we do have that risk with the forward. So I liked what I saw, but it wasn't enough for her to come back into my side. One player, though, that we had big flags on and concerns after the Matana McKinnon injury was Poppy Kelly and her ruck dominance, whether she could kind of hack it and be a ruck potential as a nice mid-pricer option for us. I think that was a really good game for her. I don't know if it was an outlier necessarily, but she seemed to really kind of be dominating there in the ruck, getting around the ground a bit. It kind of gave us a confidence that Gab Seymour is playing back. Poppy Kelly looks like a good option in ruck.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a fantasy option for the same. It's that awkward kind of mid-price, but I think Ali Dalloway and Ellie McKenzie both look very clean in the midfield. I was very happy with their work in there. I think with Sarah Hosking to come back in, I wouldn't be comfortable with either of those two to say they're comfortably going to get a lot of midfield minutes. But they definitely look good.
Yeah, look, I think Ellie McKenzie's been one who fits a really nice price, kind of similar to Montana Ham in that former number 1 pick, shows a lot of talent range. I don't know if I saw enough to suggest that she'll have that like second or third most CBAs like locked. I feel like a rotation is coming. I also thought Grace Egan looked fine, so I'm not necessarily sold that she is going to be the pick that we need, but I'm still going to keep tabs on her because I think we all see the potential.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. The other one, I just want to mention one more player, which is I thought the defensive unit was phenomenal. And one of the things they've really benefited from was Jodie Hicks kicking. Whenever they got the ball to her, she was elite going inside 50. I don't think she got it enough that I would worry about starting her in a fantasy sense, but she's going to improve Richmond quite a bit this season.
Well, that will certainly make for an entertaining team for you, Mel, given you are around the corner if Richmond are improved this year. But if we want to talk about a truly entertaining performance, we cannot go past the literal beatdown from North Melbourne against GWS on Saturday afternoon. Now, I had the pleasure of sitting down to watch this one on my Saturday morning. It was truly delightful. The only real major out was Alicia Eva was rested for this game. I'm not particularly shocked by that, as given she is one of the older players in the GWS team. I would have also said that there was some lower time on ground for Jazz Garner, who also spent a lot of time forward. Now, if I want to talk fantasy relevant takeaways, I'm going to start with positive. I'm going to go with someone who is, and I don't often say this, a friend of the pod. One of the first interviews from last season. It's Ruby Tripodi passed my eye test massively. She not only looked good at CBAs, of which she had many, but she was also taking marks in transition and looked really comfortable. Now, I don't think GWS are very good or will be very good this year, and I don't think the midfield is necessarily going to create a whole lot of difficulties for teams that want to score. But I thought Ruby Tripodi, given we're starved of forward rookies, looked good. I thought she passed my eye test, and I just think the question will be, can she hold a midfield role to at least some degree? At least it's 50% of her time on ground she plays is as a midfielder versus a forward where she struggled last year. I think she's possibly startable at an F5.
I love to hear this. She was, when we were going through the forwards episode, she was someone I was quite excited about. One, because friend of the pod, but also passed the eye test last season, and it was just a matter of can she get her time on ground up. I think midfield minutes additionally, but like time on ground as well. And yeah, this was everything that we wanted to see. It's not often we go into these games with our eyes on a particular player and then be able to check off everything that we wanted to see and go, yep, great, in you come. So, yeah, this is great confirmation.
Yes. Well, I will say one thing, though. Jenna Bruton didn't feature, so there is some question marks on whether or not she will necessarily hold the role, but she ticked most of the boxes that she was going to be able to. And if we're going to talk ticking boxes as well, probably can't go past Michaela Pauga, who I thought looked perfectly fine. I thought she showed that midfield role. She showed that she was capable of laying a lot of tackles. I'm going to guess, having not seen the fully confirmed statistics, there were not many possessions overall for a lot of GWS's midfield. They were really struggling. And I still think that Pauga showed herself to be capable. If I was going to guess a fantasy score, I would have said like 50, 55. I thought that's perfectly adequate for an F4, F5. And I think against some easier matchups, she starts with the Western Bulldogs, who we're going to talk about later. And we get a pretty good sense of how much they might get beaten down. I reckon she might be able to put up a better score when she comes into her, first run of matchups this year.
Yeah, I thought her work at stoppage was really good. It was just getting out of there quite easily. Once it was out of stoppage, the game was so free-flowing. North was just chipping it up the field at will. So I'd be a little worried that the coaches are going to be going, that ball's moving so easily in transition, and I think it was the midfield pressure on the kickers going inside 50 that I would be worrying about if I was the Giants. So maybe they'll change some things there, but honestly, I agree. I don't think there were that many other midfielders that were showing more than she was.
You are bold to assume that GWS would change something that is an obvious error, because what they will do is change things that look good, which brings me on to my second point, and that is illustrated perfectly by my probably favourite player outside of the Bombers. I maybe have 3 or 4 of them, doesn't matter. It's Tani Evans. Looked like the best player for GWS in the first half. I don't know about you guys, but she was instrumental to them not conceding 14 goals.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, I would have said she was like maybe their top 2 fantasy scorers. Comes out after half time playing as a forward, where she struggled in her first 2 seasons at GWS, really didn't look that great. And Georgia Garnett was the defender, and then they swapped. And Tani Evans looked amazing. But Tani Evans played most of the second half forward. She rolled up pretty high a couple of times to my eye, but unfortunately, she did look good. I reckon she would have had 2 scoring involvements. She should have had a goal and missed from a 45-degree angle from about 4 metres out.
Yeah, I thought she was phenomenal. The Giants, I only got to see the first half of this game, but it looked like with her involved, the Giants were able to get it up out of their D50 to halfway pretty comfortably every time. It was really just beyond that wing point that they started to struggle to move it. So I really liked her.
I think another thing that they struggle with in ball movement is Zali was not as close to the ball as I think AFLW fans, GWS fans, or AFLW fantasy fans would have wanted, because she was playing relatively deep. Now, she did have herself CBAs. Yeah, well, as we found out, she just wants to be around the ball. See, that's her MO. She was just a bit starved of delivery and also starved of opportunity to generate those secondary stoppages. So I certainly know that she's a popular pick for your M3, M4, but I didn't see what I wanted to see from her role. And I worry that for those first few games, they might say, oh, we want to see what these other midfielders can do, these newer options that we've brought in. And then we'll figure out how can we feed Zali back in, if we can figure out if our forwards are working, to make me concerned about starting her.
That would be a psycho thing to do from a coaching perspective, to take away your amazing elite young gun player that's topping the league and be like, let's just see what some other people can do and put it back a bit. Yeah, I know.
Have you watched them?
It's mind-boggling to me.
That's
my
the most
hypothesis
GWS
instead,
thing you could ever do.
I know it is, but maybe she falls under the kind of the resting category. We know that she usually goes at 110% in a game. Maybe she's just saving it up.
Whilst we're speaking of elite midfielders, I have to say, I only watched the first half here, but having seen the match review afterwards, it seems that Ash Riddell just fell short of the AFLW record for disposals in a game, which makes me think she must have only played 3 quarters, because that first half she was everywhere. It was actually extraordinary how often she was around the footy.
It was absolutely ridiculous. I actually texted someone I know who is affiliated with North Melbourne and asked, did you guys let Ash know that there's not premiership points on offer today? And his response was, we told her to take it easy. If that's Ash Riddell's easy, she might score 200 points in a game this year. She might have 55 disposals. I thought she looked incredible. Now, like I said, Jazz Garner was forward a lot more than she would probably be in the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful to see. I'm not going to in any way use it to define whether I get Riddell or Garner or anyone else, but I just love seeing it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Now, in terms of things we love to see, I loved the first quarter from Nicole Bresnahan. She looked to be back. It was someone we talked about and mentioned as an underpriced player because of injury as she came back from injury at the back end of last year. I thought she looked really comfortable in the first quarter and then barely touched the ball after that point. Now, we have no time on ground, nothing for these games, so it might have been that she was spending more time off the ground after that point, but I certainly wasn't coming away comfortable. And there, obviously, she's had some issue come up during the preseason. I can't remember what injury it was. I think it was a calf or a hamstring. From what I saw, I'm a bit concerned with starting her straight off the bat.
So in this game, got confirmation of one of my forwards, Ruby Tripodi, and also confirmation of Michaela Pauga, who's also on my field. But Eilish O'Dowd is the ruck that a lot of people are starting as their rookie ruck option, either on field or as their R2. What did you guys think?
I thought she looked like if someone took Aisling Maloney and forgot to tell her that you have to bounce the ball every 15 metres.
Nice.
Oh, it's so funny.
I think she got done 2 or 3 times, one of which was outrageous because the umpire blew the whistle after she's bounced the ball, but that's by the by. I thought she passed my eye test, but I don't know how many free kicks against she would have had.
Yeah, she was very, very good. I think she's locked her place in my side. Honestly, just have a bit of presence at stoppage was really nice, and she's so quick. Like,
some really
I honestly
good hands
think
too.
Half of her issue is that she's taking such long strides that I think she's covering the ground so quickly that she's not really had much time before she needs to bounce the ball.
I definitely think there's something to be said that she did not look overawed in ruck contests either. And I tell you who did look overawed, it's Fleur Davis, the forward, because that's where I reckon she spent a bunch of this game. Did not look like she was having a great game.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I saw her touch it.
No, I did not see a whole bunch of possessions. Well, I hate to end on a bad note, but I think that's where we're going to leave this most entertaining of performances, and we're going to move across to the biggest kind of drubbing in points to the biggest drubbing of weather, and that's Fremantle and Collingwood. And Mel, you put yourself on to watch the thunderstorm. What were your thoughts up front?
Yeah, which was actually quite good because in between this, I was recording the Adelaide episode with Will and I was like, oh no, I'm going to miss a little bit of it. But I came back because I had a half an hour delay at halftime because of the atrocious weather. So I got to watch more of the game, which is always good. So Fremantle Collingwood in Perth. Fremantle 45 to Collingwood's 15. Although surprisingly, Collingwood was leading for the first half and then Fremantle just kind of came up and hit them from behind here. So it was kind of a game of two halves, but the rain pretty much started after 5 minutes and the ground just got muddier and muddier to the point where, numbers on jumpers are blurred. What are we looking at here? It was just tackles on tackles. So to anyone watching that game doing any kind of tackle counts, yeah, there were a lot, but it's kind of weather dependent here. Some really notable outs though. Just a shout out for Will here that Sarah Verrier wasn't playing, the player he's always keen on and shouldn't bring in. Hopefully that deters him a little bit. But for Collingwood, Bree Davey was out. So that has really impacted how well some of the other midfielders played. Unfortunately for some coaches, we didn't get to see anything from Lauren Butler, who also missed a game due to a lower leg injury, which was quite a disappointing one.
She's going to miss several weeks as well, apparently. So she's not a start in our sides this season, or at least to start the year, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because the other Collingwood player that missed, which we already kind of knew as well, though, Kalinda Howarth, who was also going to be a great starting pick. So a couple of notable outs there, but the big key takeaway for me was, again, looking at players that I hadn't really considered necessarily but had an eye on, Ash McCarthy. If you're picking a Bowers-ish replacement for your midfield coming from Freo, it's Ash McCarthy. Like, I had Dana East in there for a little bit. We had question marks around Hayley Miller. Is she going to be back in the midfield doing her CBA role? But Ash McCarthy was a bit of a tackling machine, really impactful on the game. I think she's the mid-price to pick.
I just find it hilarious that we've managed to go through the entire preseason talking about everything that's different at Fremantle, and we've got to pick, who's the breakout midfielder, below 850k, 900k, and the one we talked about the least, I reckon, had 110 tackles.
Yeah.
So of course, it's the player we talked about the least, and credit to Megan Kaufman. Well, as Mel refused to give any credit, that was the one midfielder you didn't. I'm kidding.
Was on strict
I'm defending
notes
the
by
honour
Jono
of West Coast from earlier.
To mention only a certain number of players. Yeah, but yes, friend of the pod, Megan Kaufman, was also someone that we were speaking about a lot. But no, it's not Miller, it's not East, it's not Kaufman, it's McCarthy. And at least, I mean, wet weather aside, at least we've got some confirmation of which of these players should you pick from a fantasy relevance perspective. Because East was impactful, but she was kind of too far away out there on the wing to be really getting the tackles. And Freo, although they say that they're not going to be a one-person squad anymore and they're missing Stannard and Bowers, they're still a tackle-heavy game.
Yeah, I think that Dana East, to my eye, matched exactly kind of what we saw at the back end of last year, which is clean possession. She's not the same gritty in and under player. One name you've not mentioned there in the midfield group is another one we've talked about as a potential option, one we probably the most highly owned, and that's Gabby O'Sullivan. I didn't see much of her around the ball. It looked like that half-back role was where she was plastered again. Are we turned off from starting her as a result?
Yeah, she was taking a couple of kick-ins, but her shoulder looked, a couple of times I was like, is that in? So just the injury carrying.
That's just what you want from your fantasy players. Oh, is your shoulder still attached?
Yeah, on a wet tackle-heavy day.
Yeah, I was a bit squeamish. But so no, she didn't make it to my top 3 list of the Freo midfielders to be looking at because of a bit of the role and just potentially a little bit too injured there for such a tackle-heavy game.
That's entirely understandable and unfortunately very sad because the very shallow puddle of forwards that we've got just got a little bit shallower. Now, sorry to have to move across from Freo, but if you're going to talk about the player you were most intrigued by with Collingwood, or the most fantasy relevant, who would it have been?
Yeah, so this one put a smile on my face because this is someone I spent a lot of time looking at last season, Jordan Allen. We were tossing up last season and even in our Collingwood review, what do we need to see from the Butler-Slisher combo to get Jordan Allen into that fantasy relevant wing halfback role where she's always around the ball? And we were thinking maybe with Slisher and Butler back, this could be her season. Even with Butler out, this was it. She had the role that we've been looking for. She was very impactful in the game. She was kind of swapping between the forward pocket for a little bit. But then she was, kind of running around. She was taking a lot of the kicks, also on the tackles. She was really good at making space and kind of in such a sloppy game with a lot of ground ball, she was getting out there. So she was getting those marks and kicks, which we love to see. And I guess if Butler's not coming back and Slisher keeps doing kind of maybe less impactful injury resistance activities, then this could be Jordan Allen's season for fantasy relevance.
I think it's the fact that Geordie Allen has often been that winger, that halfback / winger. And I think in this game, she looked more like an out-and-out defender who was quite often the switch kick or the player who was dropping behind the ball. She looked like the only one who wanted or was able to mark it most of the time. But that probably came down to she had less pressure. She was often taking those marks in space. Now, we can't talk about Jordan Allen without talking about Ruby. What was your read on her? Because she's the most highly owned Collingwood defender at this stage at nearly 39% of fantasy teams.
Yeah, she always looked like she was a couple kicks behind the ball, and she gave off an essence of, I really don't want to get hurt while she was playing. There were a couple times, like the ball was on the ground a lot. She'd kind of bend over on the ground to try but she wouldn't pick it up. She'd just kind of like tap it out of the hustle for someone else to get it. She was really like not putting herself in a way where she could be knocked. As a result, she didn't really have the kind of Ruby-ish game that I would have wanted to see, but I think that's okay because I think it's a practice match in shit weather for someone that's prone to injury. So they were just keeping her safe.
Yeah,
what was your guys'
I got to say, if I had a broken nose and I was playing in a slop of that sort of type game, I would absolutely not be going in that hard to the contest, and I'd be saving myself for the season. So this doesn't worry me too much.
It's also not a game for an intercept marker like Ruby, and she's also not just a good distributor and a kick mark player, but she does love to run and carry the ball. And it was not a run and carry game either.
Yeah.
It was contest, tackle, hoof, run through the slop, hoof, run through the slop.
So I think that's important to flag for people that were kind of looking for a big impact of her, because especially we've spoken a lot about her in the preseason.
Yeah, 100%. Now, that was like Ruby was the one that I probably wanted to talk about the most. If you were going to talk about anyone else in this game that really caught your fancy, was there any standouts?
Yeah, I quite liked Imogen Barnett, who was someone that was, I guess, had a bit of a ruck role before Frederick really moved into that previously. And then we saw her getting into the ruck a bit more when Frederick was out in half two, which I'm not too sure why she went out. But she was really good. She was really like energetic, lots of work on the ground, where the ball was most of the time. I don't know if it's going to be that relevant from a fantasy perspective, but she seemed to be a really good kind of defense extractor and quite prominent in this game. So I think if we see her getting a little bit more of the hit-out role and ruck potential, she could be someone, but she's a bit of a tricky middle-priced one. But yeah, she was a name that I hadn't really paid that much attention to before.
So I obviously didn't watch this game, but the big thing that I've seen in the notes, which make me think, wow, there must have just been so many ruck contests, is the fact that Carly Ramos had ruck minutes. Because that's not a player that I would have put in the top handful of ruck options at the Pies. I mean, Carly Ramos is only 300K as a midfielder. What do you make of their game?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few rookies that we've seen be really impactful in some of these preseason games. Carly Ramos is one that stood out to me because she was getting in the ruck, which I wasn't quite expecting. But then also she had a really good kick on her in a game where the kicks were doing a lot of the work because it wasn't that clean of a game. But then she was also really getting in around the ball, like not sheepish or not afraid to kind of get into the mud and get dirty and be aggressive there. So she looked really good, like from the eye test of like this person is ready to play midfield.
Fascinating. Well, I think we can end on a positive note, unlike the last one, and let's move across to another incredibly positive performance, and that was Essendon and Geelong at Windy Hill. Now, Jono, this was your loner special game, so on that note, could you proffer up all of your loner details off the bat?
He went with all his friends. What are you talking about?
I would love to. I think...
I'm sorry, I don't actually think that at all. That's far too harsh, but I couldn't resist.
No. So this was actually a really good game to be watching. You know, this was 6th and 7th from last season. It's a fairly close game, which was exciting. We had a few outs that I think definitely changed the dynamic of the game. Georgia Prasparkas missed with just a very minor quad complaint. I think she should be back for round 1, but it definitely meant that there was an uneven amount of Prasparkases on the field between the two teams. And then Darcy Maloney was a big out for Geelong, and Chloe Shear out with a toe as well. And I think she's going to be missing for about half the season. So some big names missing for Geelong. The Bombers similarly had a few players out. Brooke Brown, Sophie van der Heuvel, Paige Scott not playing, Jackie Voigt, I think, out with illness. So Jackie Vaught out with illness. So definitely a few players missing, but a lot of fantasy relevance in this game. So I'm going to try run through as much of it as I can very quickly. I think the first thing is that we've seen a lot of questions online about Bonnie Toogood, because I think anyone watching the game would have thought she was pretty absent. But I want to be clear, she was on the bench at least two different stints every quarter. I think she was very, very present when she was on the field. She was floating behind at the end of quarters whenever Geelong was coming. I've got zero concerns about Bonding Too Good for the season. And similar for Maddie Prasparkas, long bench stints and still dominating. I think she had the most touches for the Bombers. I don't know if I've seen that confirmed, but just to the eye, it was clearly heads and shoulders above everyone else.
25 touches for Prasparkas.
Yeah, there we go. The most interesting player to me, though, was a rookie by the name of Emily Goff, because she's going to be a very, very good player. I think I'd be very excited if I were you, Liam. I haven't seen many games where a player has started as a key forward, then gone into the ruck, and then played the back half in defence. It was truly extraordinary to see a player be able to perform each of those roles well. She took kickouts when she was in defence. She took ruck taps in the forward line. It was a very impressive game.
Wow, some versatility playing across all lines. That's what we love to see from our fantasy relevant players.
I think it's more also we've been burnt by Champion Data, who have classified her as a midfielder, which is the position that she will play the least, I think, at AFLW level. To be perfectly honest, I think she either has to play as a forward or as a defender. I don't think ruck minutes are necessarily the go for her. The ruck that I want to see in there is Matilda Dyke as the Bombers' second ruck, but I can't disagree with you. She showed some serious talent, and she was the Bombers' first-round pick this year, and I actually think they did a pretty decent job in recruiting her.
Yeah. I don't know where she's going to settle because she played all of the roles well, but I'm certain she'll be there somewhere.
Your second fantasy-relevant takeaway was another good recruit.
Yeah, Bess Keeney. Honestly, I think this is one of the best trade-ins across all the teams because she just complements the Bombers' game plan so well. The amount of mark kicks that she was able to find in transition, she was a great outlet kick. She was a great kick inside 50 and was also really good at just keeping pressure whenever the ball was turned over. So I think she's going to be fantastic. It's a really awkward price and it's also... I just don't know how you fit her in the side, but I've been fiddling with my team a little bit just to see if it's possible because I think she's going to have a bit of a bump this season.
I definitely think she will have some kind of bump. I think her importance at Essendon to help set up their ball movement, we really did struggle with that last year. And I thought she was as good a pick as we could have hoped for. As a Bombers fan, it's tough as a mid. If she was a defender, I think that would be far more popular as a player to bring in.
Yeah.
Well, popular defenders then, I think the one player that most people will want to hear about is a very popular rookie defender, and that's Abby McDonald. I saw bits of the first quarter in earnest, watching live. She looked like she had a bunch of the ball. I don't know about you guys. What did you guys think?
Yeah, no, I really liked her. I thought she was very, very good. The ball... Just to explain the game a little bit more, the first half, the ball just lived in the Bombers' forward line. I think the scoreline was close, but it was 9 scoring shots to 1 at halftime rather than a 13-point margin. It was quite a lot. So definitely a lot of the Geelong defenders were picking it up, but I thought she got a lot of the ball. She took marks, she tackled, and she also, I think she applied good defensive pressure. So I think that's probably the big part is that I think she's found herself a spot for round 1.
That is handy. Now, she may have had a better spot in round 1 if Meg McDonald had not been cramping, but instead had done her ACL. Yeah. The other rookie that we probably wanted to talk about was Lily Pearce, following in earnest again. Now, I think we've given away the game by talking about the fact that Eilish O'Dowd is in most of our sides, but I don't know about you all. I thought she looked okay as a ruck, but did not appear to be doing much when the ball hit the ground.
Yeah, no, she definitely did not impact a lot around the contest. I think Kate Darby was solid in the ruck, but Lily Pearce and Gabby Featherston is the other option we were sort of looking at as a 300k forward who might be running through the ruck. Neither of them did too much, if I'm honest. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to roll into round 1. I think it's unlikely they run with Kate Darby as a solo ruck, but whoever is in there with her, I'm not sure that they're going to have the fantasy chops that we want them to have.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the days of last year when we were able to run at 3 rookie rucks in our side are well in the rearview mirror. The one player that I thought fascinated me forward line in our forward lines that have really struggled was Aisling Maloney, who looked incredible. Looks like she just wants to bully the Bombers, because the last time I saw her in person, she was doing very similar things and just being more athletic, faster to the ball at the back, has a great leap on her, and her snap was one of the few Geelong highlights for the first 3 and a bit quarters.
Yeah, no, it was great. I was right behind that one. I could watch it sort of just curl through. But she was basically the only target they had. If they went any other way into their forward line, the ball was coming straight back out. So I thought she was very, very impressive.
I do think that there's some value there in Aisling Maloney. If we really are dire, I can see a world where she pops a 70, where she has like a Katie Brennan type of ceiling.
Yeah. She sat up most of the second half, also hypothetically cramping. Of the 2 injuries that I saw that were very concerning with her and Meg McDonald's, hers definitely looked less severe, so I wouldn't be worried about her for round 1.
Less severe than an ACL. Mel, was there anyone in this game that you were particularly enamoured by?
Well, I didn't really watch that much of it, but I was going to ask about one of the other rookies that we were quite keen on previously, which was Chantel Mason.
She came on late, didn't she?
I was really hoping she'd have an impact with Chloe Shear out, but she didn't come on until the second half, unfortunately. And I don't think she had that much of an impact. So there were actually a bunch of Geelong rookies in this game, because we also saw Caitlin Thorne run through the midfield for a lot of the day, which was quite interesting. I think that was more about Georgie Prasparkas being out, because we saw a similar amount of midfield transition time for Brooke Plummer, which I thought was really interesting. But I don't expect either of them will get good minutes in the season.
Talking about Georgie Prasparkas being out, a couple of the players we were talking about in the Geelong review was the other midfielders in Amy McDonald and Nina Morrison. I imagine that if we saw particularly better games from them in this game, it could have been a bit more because of Prasparkas being out. But did you see anything more than just replacing Prasparkas' role that got you excited about these guys in the game?
I thought they played really, really well. I do think they were at every centre bounce just because of the lack of other options, really. If I was thinking of starting them already, I would be very happy with that performance, but I wouldn't go out of my way to change if I wasn't keen already. Similar sort of days, if I'm honest, from Rebecca Webster and Chantel Emerson. I thought they were very, very good. The ball did spend a lot of time in that defence, so I wouldn't really expect anything else.
Yeah, they do start off with a good run, though, Geelong. Well, moving across from one of my favourite teams to Jono, your favourite, we both got a chance to watch this. It was Sydney and Hawthorn. I thought that the first half, or the first quarter and a half, was really even. It was pretty close. I think even Sydney might have been ahead, and then Hawthorn banged on 3 goals to end the second half and then ran away with it. The second quarter, and then ran away with it in the second half, winning 77-28. In terms of the outs, though, I think that the biggest out, quite literally in her height and in her impact, was Ali Morfitt. And I do think we are now seeing that Sydney probably do need to be recruiting some backup rucks, because they look like they really struggle without it.
I mean, Will was so excited last year having Ali Morfitt, and he's got to this game to watch his favourite player not be there. I mean, it made him sick, and now he's not here tonight. So absolutely devastating for Sydney.
My, fantasy relevant takeaway is I really like Sophia Hurley. I thought her first half in particular, where she spent a lot of time in the midfield, she looked incredible. She looked to be getting marks in transition. She was laying those tackles. She was getting either CBAs, or she was that player streaming straight in off the half forward line. And I think I liked what I did see, which was I saw more forward time for Chloe Malloy, which is something that we talked about in the Sydney episode as being, if that happens, I think someone has to replace her. And I think Sophia Hurley, for the time being, looks like the player that has.
Because there was a lot of question marks on who that could be. It could be Cynthia Hamilton. It could be Montana Ham. It could be an additional bump for Laura Gardner. But very happy to have seen that Sophia Hurley.
Agreed. I think Laura Gardner looked... It's going to pain me not to have her this year if I don't start with her, because she's ridiculous. She's stupid. Like, she and Ash Riddell, I reckon, just have this unique accumulation capability. I did think I saw a couple of moments in the midfield and higher up the ground from Cynthia Hamilton. Same goes for Montana Ham, but I didn't really see a whole massive amount of midfield time. John, I'll throw to you for a Hawthorn relevant take. Is there someone that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there was one player that I really didn't expect to get anywhere near the amount of midfield time that they did, and that was Mattia Breed. She was everywhere. I think, she's kind of been in the midfield a little bit before, but sometimes playing is sort of like a second ruck. But here she was just in the middle. She was getting plenty of the ball. She was, the Hawks tackle well, and she was no exception in that midfield. She was getting amongst it. I think at 351k as a midfield option, we've lost a couple options that we thought we had, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But she is someone that is currently sitting in my side.
Wow, that is surprising. If we were talking last week about who are the players that we're not thinking about that might end up in our team, I reckon we could have gone through 150 before we got to Mattia Breed.
Yeah.
But I can't disagree with you. I thought she looked great, and sitting at 350k, I still think she's a bench option that's not going to break us money-wise. So, yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't watching so much as listening to a bit of this game. And one thing I wondered was, Batesy didn't sound that prominent in terms of the game. I heard her name quite a few times in the commentary, but then when I looked at the screen a little bit, I was like, not really sure where she is. Do we think that that has anything to do with it?
The thing for me with Batesy was I definitely noticed a tag for large portions of the game from Tanya Kennedy, and that didn't feel like it was too outrageous because I do think Sydney see Tanya Kennedy's main skill as a defensive midfielder, and she has the running capability to be a tagger. So I think we definitely saw a muted impact from Batesy, but I would almost certainly put it down to that. And I don't know if every team's going to run a tag.
Yeah, and she still kicked a pretty impressive goal. I think she dipped out of the game late, so it was really just that early section where she was around, and I thought she was doing Batesy things. I'm not too concerned.
I wouldn't be concerned as a Richmond fan. I just don't love it for classic fantasy where we're trying to generate that cash. On cash generation, though, midfielder who saw a lot of CBAs, got to mention her. And I'm going to say friend of the pod for the second time in an episode, which is not very frequent. Hayley Bullis, she missed all of last season with an ACL coming across from West Coast. She had a whole bunch of CBAs, particularly starting in that second quarter. She looked to be laying some really good pressure, laying a bunch of tackles to my eye. I thought she passed the eye test. And if you're going to start her on your bench at M6 or in utility, I would not talk anyone out of it.
Yeah, I really liked it.
Is there any other rookies?
I think Sarah Grunden had moments where I was pretty excited as a small forward. I think the first quarter she was pretty prominent. The last quarter she was pretty prominent. She dropped away a little bit through the middle, but I think that's to be expected from a small forward in a team that got beaten pretty comfortably. So that's one that I'll definitely be keeping an eye on as the season starts.
Something I was really excited about in this Hawthorn game was the opportunity that we had a ruck, a middle-priced ruck, and someone who's still a rookie in my mind, even though it's been a few seasons, but coming in as that solo ruck role and had the potential to increase her scoring with Lucy Wales. Sounds like she had a good crack at it.
Yeah, well, she was not exactly going up against a stellar cast of characters. With Ali Morfitt missing, she basically had her way. But I don't know about you, Jono, but I thought she looked like she'd put on some shoulder width. She was looking a bit stronger, and that's probably the one complaint that I have as a Wales sister supporting team. We have this, bond that we have. They're not great at hit outs to advantage, and I think that sometimes they're a bit passive in ruck contests. I thought she passed my eye test, and she's not even on my team.
Her impact around the contest was so much better than previous seasons. I'm pretty excited as a Hawks fan. I think she's going to be doing a lot more around the ground. If it wasn't for that first 3 games where the Hawks have quite difficult ruck matchups, I'd almost certainly start it. I might anyway, to be honest, because I am looking for a ruck in that area. I'm going to do some fiddling after this.
You're what you're actually mean to say is you're looking for a Hawthorn player on field.
Yes, of course I am.
That is exactly what you mean. Well, I think that just about wraps up the fantasy relevant options. And you'll note we didn't talk much about Casey Sheriff. Is that who you're going to throw to, Jono? Because I thought she was pretty quiet.
I was just going to tick off a couple other players that I think people were thinking about, because I thought Laura Gardner, if you was thinking of starting with her, she looked fantastic, found the ball at will in that first half. Very similar with Ella Heads, who was one of the best players in that backline all day. A lot of intercept balls, a lot of transition ball. I think she would be very good. And then I think a few people had been talking about Casey Sheriff. You're right. I think she's a player we need to talk about. She did spend the whole day in the midfield, which was exciting. I don't know if she got as much of it as I was expecting she would in that role. I don't know. What do you think?
I thought she was largely absent. And I think there was also some time forward. There was maybe a couple of clearances that I noted, but I didn't see the tackles. I didn't see the possessions. I didn't necessarily see someone who looked like a fantasy scorer up front. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I think our forward lines would all be better for it, but I didn't come away confident that I'd start with her.
Yeah. The other player that I'm looking at is Michaela Williamson. I thought she looked excellent as a rookie at the Hawks and could be an option for us this season.
Absolutely. And we're now going to move into possibly the most rookie-heavy game, and that is Gold Coast and the Bulldogs, which was on Saturday night. Mel, you're the one who's in charge of talking about this one. It was 5th against 18th. Did that show out in what you saw?
I'd say so, yeah. But also, it was a pretty windy ground. So we saw the Gold Coast Suns come away with 68 to Bulldogs 20. But, the first quarter the first half really, was just an absolute flogging. The wind was really helping the Suns. We got, I think, 3 goals or something from Stanton, a goal within the first minute or so from the Bulldogs. It was just... from Gold Coast. It was just great to watch if you're supporting Gold Coast, got to say. But then we did see, I guess, the ball get a little bit more time in the Bulldogs' back half in the second quarter when they had a bit of a wind advantage. So we got to see a little bit of how they intend to play. So one of the really exciting things from this game for me was Charlie Rowbottom as an absolute lock. She's someone that I've been thinking about quite a bit for my kind of round 6 buy round. Is she someone I start with and cough up the cash, and then I've got a great option for a captaincy in that week? And yes, she definitely is that role. She absolutely smashes it. She's exactly what we saw last season in terms of her power, her tackles, her kind of relevancy. So fantastic option there. But then also we got to see someone that I know John is quite excited about, which is Ella Smith, getting in a couple of the CBAs there. So that's also good. She's not probably one I'll be putting on my sheet right next to Charlie Rowbottom, but it was good to see her up there.
I love that you've gone with someone that one of the few players that we have decent stats for, 29 disposals, 10 tackles and 8 clearances. We don't have her tackle numbers, but I'm going to guess it was double digits. And she spent most of the fourth quarter off up against a 300k rookie who maybe had 10 disposals. And 3 or 4 tackles.
Oh, but what are 10 disposals,
Oh, they were a beautiful 10 disposals in a humid night on the Gold Coast. Those are everyone's favourite 10 disposals. The one player that I reckon I had the most questions going into this game, because we did see a bit in the match sim, was Ellie Gavalis. I certainly have some thoughts on the role, but Mel, did you have any gauge of where she was playing?
I just remember my main takeaway being that I wasn't seeing what I wanted to out of her. There was a few other players I was seeing instead that I was quite excited about, but I wasn't that hot on Gavalis after that game.
That is, I think that's a fairly good summation. I thought it was almost no CBAs. She was playing half forward, getting very high up the ground. I think she took about 3 marks in the same spot on the,
that was a good few minutes there. Yeah.
D50 arc in transition, but probably didn't see the transition game that I would have loved. The kind of stoppage game and stoppage scoring that we'd want.
Yeah, I would have thought the stoppage game is her main strength, and she was definitely being played as that transition player. So outside of the marks that she took, I just really didn't notice her much around the contest. And it didn't help that the Gold Coast midfield just dominated. I think Single was extraordinary on the night, Rowbottom was extraordinary on the night, and Whitford had a good game too. So
Whitford as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gold Coast have got a stellar midfield.
Yeah, I still think that Lucy Single has some ways to go with her kicking, but Claudia Whitford particularly is just an excellent force. I think if there's someone who streams away from stoppages and plays like Monconti, I think Claudia Whitford passes my eye test massively. Now, if we want to talk about run and gun, one person I saw do a lot of it, not always very well, but very entertaining, was Cleo Butterfin. And Mel, I think you wanted to talk about the Western Bulldogs defenders.
Yeah, Cleo Butterfin, I had an eye on because you get excited when you see a rookie play, and she just absolutely grabbed it and sprinted along the wing. She was fending off 2 defenders in a row, like pushing off the tackles, bounced the ball, and then kind of like stuffs the kick. But she has got such great enthusiasm, and I really love to see that. She shining star for the Bulldogs there. And it priced at only $400,000. Like she looked like a good option that we saw her in this match sim and the Pracky game. It looks like she's got a role there doing that kind of move if she can just perfect it a bit more. So she's someone I'm definitely hotter on than, say, Gavalis. But also Jess Fitzgerald was outstanding. We love that move to the back line. She was kind of the highlight, I reckon, of the defensive unit there. She unfortunately for fantasy perspective, it doesn't really matter how great she was in that role because she's priced as a midfielder and she's mid-priced on that as well. So she's probably not the role that you want to be bringing in, but she's one that if she keeps up that role this season, she's one next season could be a great option. But then Georgia Stathis as well. Didn't quite see, I don't think, what I wanted to out of that role necessarily for her. I think because maybe of her price a little bit as well, but I'm cooling on her.
Yeah, I think the problem with Georgia Stathis is Jess Fitzgerald. Jess Fitzgerald has all of the CBAs.
Yeah, she was the shining star. Yeah.
Sorry, CBAs kick-in. She is like jogging like 30 metres back to the goal square to go and take them. But speaking of Georgia Stathis, I think it's very funny that Cleo Butterfin was the player that she named as the one to watch on our Western Bulldogs episode, in part because former rugby player who just shows some pure athleticism all the time and does something different.
Yep.
And
checks out.
She definitely looked like she was playing rugby for about 90% of the time she was holding the ball. But I passed the eye test on excitement. I think there's a future Eilish Sheeran type of run and gun defender there.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was about to say. I think that style of play is brilliant. And I don't know if she's going to have the same sort of impact in her first season that Sheeran had, because that was something else. But I don't think I'd appreciated how little football that she had played. Because apparently, I mean, going from rugby to AFL, I think she went straight into that Giants Academy before she was ending up down here. And I think she'd only played like 10 to 15 footy games before joining the Bulldogs. So a lot of talent, but I think it's going to take a while to adjust the AFLW level. I will
say that one of the other rookies that I was exceptionally keen on was Annalia McKee. She passed the eye test at the match sim and she did it again. She has such a really good body on her that she was kind of quite a strong, prominent player as well. She was really running around quite a bit there. She kind of was allowed to go wherever she wanted, and she was often the one that they got the ball to as well, which I quite liked. Involved in the transitions up the ground as well. Her role just stood out to me.
I agree. Yeah. I think she was their best transition marking forward. I don't think they have many. Because the one that didn't really show much was Christy Lee Weston-Durner, who looked like she really struggled. Had a few drop marks, a couple of missed tackles, didn't make much of an impact. And I think if we're going with forwards on what we expect to be a bad Western Bulldogs team, going with the more experienced McKee, who's shown more and who is 120k cheaper, is the way to go.
Yeah, I like the idea that she can roam up the ground because it's going to be harder to get it to players like Weston Turner and Hartwig in the forward line. It's much better to be that one kick up the ground just to make it a little easier.
Yep.
100%. Now, we can't go past this game without talking about one of our at least pod favourites to discuss, and that's Dizzy Darcy. I thought she looked excellent. I thought that as well with Katie Lynch and Charlotte Wilson back there, I think that there is now a host of players who can play key defensive roles, and the days of Daisy Darcy as a lockdown being dragged to the goal square ought to be far behind her. She laid tackles high up the ground. She's a beautiful kick inside 50. I don't know if I want to start her. She's at an awkward price at $8.16. It's like 100k more than Karen Peterson, but I thought she looked awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, me too. Absolutely. I think we really got to see more of her in the game.
Well, I think that's going to be a beautiful way to end. Unless, Jono, you have delightful to put up your hand and there's
we've
someone else
gotten
you
a
want
lot
to
of
talk about.
we've got a lot of questions about some rookies in this game, so I just wanted to pass off. I thought Jasmine Smith as an option at the Dogs, she played quite well, but I think it's just it's an awkward role for her to be playing on the sort of the flanks. So I don't think I would start her. Brooke Barwick got a few CBAs at the Dogs, so that was promising. I think if we see her named in round 1, that'll be exciting. I think just because of her price, because she was quite a high draft pick, I don't think I would be starting there. And that is a similar but very different thing for Elaine Grigg because, again, a high price but didn't play in this game despite being named as part of the extended squad. Couple other players, Elise Barwick was one who I thought was out on the commentary quite a bit, and the wing role, I just worry that she's going to get
She was in the
lost.
commentary booth.
She wasn't in the commentary. The commentary booth called
commentating.
her out quite a bit. But I think that was more about the Dogs not being able to stop the transition of Gold Coast. I would worry in a tougher game. So I don't think there's necessarily a role change that I would get too excited about there. And then finally, I thought Keely Fullerton looked great, particularly with the helmet, very easy to spot on the field, which was nice, but had a very low time on ground. I think she only played, the last quarter and a half. So I would worry that she is a lock in the side. But if she is, definitely want to keep an eye on.
When we were chatting through teams early, did one of you two have Alice Edmonds as your ruck?
Yeah.
What did you see from Edmonds in this game that got you to have her as your ruck?
I didn't expect to take anything from this game from what Edmonds had done. It was a game on one of the biggest grounds in the AFLW, up against one of the toughest matchups in a preseason matchup. That spells to me, I reckon I saw maybe 20, 25 ruck contests for the game, it felt like. If we'd got stats, I wouldn't have looked at them. I just wanted to see to make sure that no one else was rucking with her. There was no George Borg, and that was what I wanted, and that's what I got. So Edmonds has a beautiful run to start the season. We know that she can ruck well. I just wanted to see some trust in her to ruck the most of the game. I didn't think it was ever going to be a good game for a ruck to score well.
Nice. That checks out.
Beautiful. Well, now moving across to, we've gone from the most heavy, I would say, rookie game to probably one of the most interesting games of the entire weekend, also filled with rookies from both teams. And that's Port Adelaide and Melbourne. I had my eyes on this one, and it was the most surprising result. I don't know if I can speak for you guys, but a 62 to 52 point win for Port Adelaide out at Alberton. It was a huge upset. Now, there were also some hugely impactful outs from this game. Abby Dowrick, apparently with a finger injury that may need surgery. We're yet to hear confirmation. Captain Janelle Cuthbertson missing. Vice captain or member of the leadership group Ange Foley missing. Both of whom have finger injuries. And then, as we've had announced today, Hannah Ewings is not going to be selected this season and was inactive. And then for Melbourne, the most important movable chess piece that they've got is Taylor Harris, who is moving apparently from forward to defence, but has played in the ruck and played in the midfield before, was out with a quad injury. And then Blaine Mackin, who was a CBA midfielder in the back end of last year, was also not playing as she returns back to training after having come back from Ireland. It was tough to get a read necessarily on exactly what the game plans were going to be. And I must also say, sounds like a pretty awful facial injury to Liv Purcell. And that was someone that was very relevant when we did the Melbourne episode. I talked about her as, I think, my second most relevant player. So it sounds like there's another midfield spot open at Melbourne, and I empathise with a broken face, having done that myself. If I was going to talk about fantasy relevant takeaways, the one that I thought was the most fascinating was Shanae Goldrick, defender, 600k. Looked to be playing absolutely everywhere and also had the ball on a string wherever she was going on the ground. She played the first quarter off half forward line. I reckon she would have had 6 or 7 touches. Middle portion of the game, she was playing predominantly midfield, if only a CBA midfielder, laying tackles, getting marks in transition, linking up well with Paxi Paxman, who was off halfback. And then in the final bit of the game, she was off halfback, which is somewhere where we know there's not necessarily a singular player at Melbourne who will take off all of the kind of defensive transition scoring, but we know that they're able to pass it well, and Goldrick looked to be the beneficiary of that. I've got her in my side at this point. Let's put it that way. I was that enamored by the performance. I think she looked incredible, and I think at 600K, for a team that needs players to be around the ball and play in lots of positions, she showed the ability to score in all of them.
Yeah, no.
I love it. And that fits the category of players that we wouldn't have expected to be super fantasy relevant before the game.
Yeah, she caught my eye when we watched the match simulation as someone who looked to be attacking the ball really well, but we had nothing even remotely close to stats. It barely feels like a full football game. The quarters are different lengths, different stuff is going on. But yeah, I hadn't looked at her price much this season going into the game, but I am intrigued now. That was a supreme performance.
Yeah.
And it also, if we want to talk supreme performances, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was also just going to say there's, with Liv Purcell out, I think always just more scope for people to run through the middle. I think it's not just that Liv Purcell's out, but also they've traded away Eliza West in the offseason. So there's so many opportunities for people to come into that midfield. I assumed that the next supreme performance you were going to talk about is another player who ran through there.
Yeah, it's Kate Hoare. She had the ball on a string. It's nice to watch that kind of dominating performance when I actually haven't got her in a fantasy or not had her in the fantasy side yet, because it looked like GWS from round 2 last year. She was their best target inside 50, looked incredible, played more midfield time. We've seen an article since we last did an episode on Melbourne saying she's going to spend more time in the midfield. She's extremely expensive as forward, but we don't have many forwards we're confident in. I think at this stage, the role is good enough that I might be willing to look past Melbourne's awful run to start the year.
Oh, I was going to say instead of too good. Like, is that how hot you are?
No, I pick both. Go premiums heavy in the forward line, because I just worry that the stab I'm going to take at a 500, 600, 700K player is just going to completely flop, and I'm going to lose all my cash, and I'm not going to want to hold them in my side.
Yeah, there's a certain safety to saying that Kate Hoare is going to be a top 5 forward if she's playing midfield. Feels the safest of the options we have at the top.
And I just think that even if she does play a bit of time forward, I think Melbourne are going to be worse this year, but I still think the quality of the ball use of what we saw from a Lil Mithern, Paxi Paxman is still involved. A player that really popped to me in transition with Megan Fitzsimon, who had some good scores at the back end of last year, some decent scores in finals, had popped in match sim. I still think they're going to be able to get it inside 50. They might not be the hands down, you can't score against us, we will absolutely kill you, that we may have seen at parts in the last 2 years. But I do think Kate Hoare, even if playing forward, she's still going to get some service.
Now, we've talked a lot about this Melbourne side, but I think we are burying the lead when we talk about supreme midfielders in this game. You gotta tell us about Shanae Goody, mate.
Shanae Goody, 25 disposals, possibly the best player on the ground, maybe second to Kate Hoare. Looked like a 4th-year player. Like, if you told me that, like, she was taking the draft class before Zali Goldsworthy, alongside like Georgie Prespakis and Charlie Rowbottom, I would fundamentally have nothing to disagree with. She looked incredible. She has the ball on a string. She is a beautiful kick, and apparently off both sides of her feet. If you're not starting her at M4 or M5, I unless you're starting at M3 for whatever reason, I cannot fathom not starting Shanae Goody on my field to start the year. And I think she is a host of really good rookie-priced midfielders at Port Adelaide to pick from. I think Sachi Syme was laying a boatload of tackles, and she had great points per minute numbers in a few games at the back end of last year. Caitlin Wendland has a beautiful left foot on her, and I'd fail to appreciate but she's played the last 2 seasons in the Sandfield W, averaging 80. I thought she looked really good as well. Piper Window looked good before she went down with an ankle injury. We've not heard what that is. She's been very popular. She's been in my side. She's out at the moment, but if she gets the clean bill of health, I think that it's definitely going to be another pick to have. I think that Port Adelaide, after last year being a frustrating fantasy force for us because they couldn't score any points, they looked really good in this game. their forwards were playing well. They looked to be tackling better, and they looked to be kicking better in transition. So I loved what I saw from this game from Port.
Yeah, and it feels like there's so much opportunity with Hannah Ewings being inactive for the season. And if Abby Darrick does miss, I mean, there's so much run through that midfield.
Wow. It's going to be a rookie strong midfield.
And I also think that Kirsty Lamb is the perfect backbone to that midfield. I don't think she's going to score huge points, but I also think that she's not going to just allow that midfield to be walked over. She's got so much experience. She's got the battle-tested, method that she plays. I think that Port Adelaide's actually going to be an exciting team this year, which we haven't really had a chance to say a lot of the time, unless it's involved either of Dowrick or Ewings. I thought it was a fascinating performance. I don't know about you guys, but I think that I expected to have if you'd asked me this time last year how many Port Adelaide players I'd expect to have this time, like when we play this year, I would have said one, maybe, and Lauren Young. But I've come away being like, you could pick 4 or 5 and not be playing outrageous fantasy.
It's good to hear. It's really good to hear. We had a couple people asking about players like Molly Brooksby or Ella Bogue. Did you make much of their games?
Brooksby looked clean, playing off halfback, sadly not a defender in the fantasy platform. He's a midfielder. I liked what I saw. I don't know if he would have had that many counting stats. Ella Bogue, I didn't see that much that I liked. And speaking of rookies, I think that Alicia Pisano is going to play as a small forward. I don't think we're going to see her around the ball that much. She might have a few pop scores, but I don't expect huge scoring. The forward that from Melbourne that I did actually quite like was Riley Wotherspoon. She's 376k, so a little bit awkward because she was a high draft pick, and she's also pretty inexperienced at football. If we talk about Butterfin having played only, a few games, I think Wotherspoon's played like 3 games of officially organised football before she got drafted. So that's going to be a bit of a tough one. And I also think that I believe Grace Beasley got injured, but she was getting a lot of CBAs, and I really liked what I saw from there. Again, maybe not amazing counting stats, but I definitely think that there's a fantasy relevant player there.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is more rookies than I think I've seen in a game. Actually, having so much.
It was
relevance.
Actually wild. Every time I look down at like my app and going, that's another Port rookie. It was absolutely outrageous.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like players like Jazz Stewart or Maria Maloney were just like, I don't need to be on the field. We'll let the kids run around.
We'll just let them do it and score. I could keep talking about that game for much longer, but I will avoid going down that rabbit warren. We're up to the final game of the weekend, and it is Adelaide against Carlton. So again, I was the one putting in the Sunday shift after you both had watched a lot more of the games on Saturday. I think that this game was, I'd say the first half was really relevant, and it was an Adelaide team that looked to be in fine form immediately. In terms of the key outs, very frustratingly, no Karen Peterson, which really did make life difficult for us in seeing how Carlton were going to go out of halfback. And then just some annoying outs for Adelaide, Caitlin Gould, Tia Charlton, Najwa Allen, players that we'd expect to see during the season across all 3 lines. So one that was a bit difficult to tell what was going on. I think in terms of my main fantasy takeaway, I'll go try and do it quickly, but Dana Finn had the ball on a string, playing off halfback and a wing, priced at 316k as 316k as a defender. I thought she showed the ability to find the ball better than I was expecting, and can definitely be a play at your D5 or D6 if she can repeat that performance. The ball lived in Carlton's defence, so I reckon if we'd got fantasy numbers, I think Finn would have been highest, but I would have said that Dersma and Beattie and Cordner and even DV, Darcy Vesio, they'd dropped very deep in defence to try and stop Adelaide, in particular in those first 3 quarters, from just absolutely hounding them. So I think that all of them, I think Dana Finn was the best, but I also think I saw enough from Dersma and Beattie over the weekend. I don't know if you guys have watched, but have you got many of those Carlton defenders at this stage?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. What I'm really liking is just this is the second game this preseason that they've really showed us that they're willing to, chip the ball around the back line and find that exit kick rather than try and just run it through, which is what they've been doing in previous seasons, or just banging the ball long. So I'm a big fan of the changing game style. I am so frustrated that Karen Peterson hasn't played because she has been in my preseason team all year. And I really want to pick her, but I can't off of no game time. We don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, I would say, though, there was still a lot of hack kicking. It was just a lot of Adelaide putting the ball straight back into the D50, but definitely an improvement in game plan. If we're going to talk Adelaide, though, can't go past talking about Anne Hatchard spending a little bit more time forward. So we did see a real interesting mix in the midfield, but Noffy dominated. I think we saw the most classic Noffy performance you would ever see in a practice game. I reckon she, if we'd had fantasy stats, cruised past 125 without breaking a sweat. It'll be interesting to see where Anne Hatchard plays during the season. In terms of rookies in the forward line for Adelaide, Brooke Boylow, even though playing as a mid, was playing up forward. So that was an interesting one to watch for me. And Danielle Ponta looked to be playing that same start at CBA transition forward role that she has in the past. But in terms of roles that we've not seen playing forward, Chelsea Bedell, the defender, kicked 2 goals in the first quarter, and she's been a key All-Australian key defender and popped up as a key forward. Zoe Prowse played across all 3 lines, even rucked a little bit. And I do think that comes down to the loss of Montana McKinnon and then also Caitlin Gould missing this game. I think the tall timber, there's going to be a bit of shuffling going on Adelaide. It's probably their one weakness at the moment is figuring out who their key tools are and who are their switches if anyone has to go down or has to spend time on the bench. Chelsea Randall looks like a defender again. So just a warning, I don't know if necessarily that midfield role is back. Well, it sounds to me like I could just rant about this game by myself. But Jono, have you got anything that you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I prefer Chelsea Randall in the back line than I do in the forward line. So at least that's a small upgrade there. I think one of the things that I find really interesting was it was a low ruck contest battle. You know, the ball was kind of being thrown in and out of the defense of Carlton. So there weren't a lot of ruck contests. But both rucks I thought were very, very interesting because we saw Bree Moody and Jess Good without the Celine Moody third in there. That was another missing player, and I thought that was really interesting. I'm curious to see why Celine Moody didn't play because she was at the game. She was on the bench just being tested for something. We didn't find out what. So I'm curious if she's going to start the season or if we're going to find out there's some sort of lingering injury going on there. And the other one was Jess Allen being supported by Zoe Prowse, but I think Jess Allen seemingly had the role from what I could see. And the question is really just, you know, how much do you take against a match where she was basically having the hardest matchup you could possibly have for rucks?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to say definitively how good Jess Allen's going to be this year. But I think the thing I did like is that the only other dedicated ruck on the list really is Lily Tarleton, and she came on and played very late and didn't actually have that much time in the ruck itself. And I also would have said that Jess Allen didn't ruck as much as I would expect, but it seemed like that's because they were trialling who their rotating ruck would be from their key players. So their Bedell's, Prowse, kind of those ilk of players that might be the chop out during the season.
Someone we've been keen for in the club reviews, but I haven't heard you guys mention it yet, is Maddie Gearan.
Yeah.
Thoughts on her?
Maddie Gearan was fine. Like, didn't have a lot of the ball, but not a lot of the Carlton mids did. That was another thing. The ball spent a lot of time in defence for Carlton because it was not in the midfield. That was all Adelaide.
Yeah. It's a tough midfield matchup, but it's kind of unfortunate because she's played Melbourne and then Adelaide, so it's not the easiest preseason to have to deal with. But I don't think in either, while she's had the role, I don't know if she's kind of hitting the season with form and with any sort of, I don't know, fantasy excitement. So I'm a little bit less likely now to have her than I was previously.
Yeah. And particularly if that's a role where it's more time spent rolling up off half forward, I don't love it as much. And if we're going to talk rookies that I didn't love as much, I didn't necessarily love either of the performances from Lila Keck or Meg Robertson, who were looking lively and have decent ownership, but I think they are fantasy prospects for future years. Well, we may have taken a year to finish this episode, But we're not going to finish
so
just yet because
excited.
Mel has a point that she wants to make, and I'm desperately sorry for trying to seem like I've just cut you off.
Yeah, I really wanted to finish. It is past my bedtime, and I really wanted to finish with, so she's not gearing up for a big one then.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that is a sign that we have been recording for a
by
long
golly,
time.
by crikey. Oh.
Great commentary there, Jono. We haven't had enough laughs in this episode. We haven't said enough stupid shit because we've done 2 hours of very intense facts. And I was like, let's just lighten the mood before we ease off. But this was a great chat, guys. I didn't get to watch all the games on account of doing other things on my weekend. But this has been very informative to hear from you guys about some of the games I missed. So thank you for the great chat.
No problem. I was going to see if we wanted to talk about the players that had been most locked in or thrown out of their sides by this time of the year, but I do think we may need to do that at another stage for fear of creating a year-long podcast episode. I hope everyone enjoyed today. If you have enjoyed it, make sure you just subscribe to us at FreeKickWPod on Twitter and Instagram, where we do put out a whole bunch of different stuff on social media, particularly if you're looking for our best 21s from our club preview series. You can also find the podcast feed, obviously on the Free Kick feed, but also on the official AFLW Fantasy podcast feed. And if you want more information, make sure you're following AFL Fantasy and AFL Women's on Twitter. Jono and myself have been writing a bunch of articles. They go up every couple of days. They're also shared by us, and then also a bunch of the official accounts on Twitter. And I've seen a couple mentioned on Instagram. If you also prefer watching our episodes, or at the very least prefer to use YouTube for your podcast listening, we do have a YouTube channel. It is just Free Kick AFLW Fantasy Podcast, and you'll be able to find us there and keep those numbers up. Mel, you'll be happy to know we had an episode go over 50 views this week, which is, last time we checked it about a week and a half ago, I think we had a max of 9. So we are kicking some serious goals. That'll be all
for every view, I sit there and go, woohoo. So please keep them up because it makes me very happy.
Look at this exponential growth.
Well, we really do need you on this podcast to keep everything moving. We have so many things to do. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to find me on social media, you can find me on Twitter at LiamAFLW Fantasy.
If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at FreeKickJono.
And I am Free Kick Mel on Twitter.
I hope absolutely everyone enjoyed this marathon episode. You'll be hearing more of us in the coming days with our club preview series. And then next week, it's the big week. It's the week the season starts. So you'll be getting bumper content and episodes for us. So watch out, and you'll hear from us soon.
Bye.
Bye.